So, Jim, you had a long, outstanding career in track and field. Probably what people would remember most is that you participated in the 1960 Rome Olympics. What was that like?
Well, for that particular year, Darrell Burleson and myself had not been beaten, so it was sort of a foregone conclusion that both of us would make that team. And the only thing you had to worry about is not falling down or getting tripped, that sort of thing. And it was very exciting to be able to go. And we both obviously made the team, and the third person that made it was Peter Close, but he didn't do much in the finals. I don't think he made it to the finals.
And so, what were the results of the Olympics? Who won the race, actually?
Herb Elliott won the race, and by an outstanding distance. He set a world record in the Olympic Games, and that's usually not done. Usually the runners are watching for position and trying to win it. A lot of times when records are set, they'll go as fast as they can the whole way and set records that way. But he did both at the same time, and I'd known him a little bit from earlier races. But I was excited about making the finals. It was only going to be a 9-man final, and I looked at the chart of people that were going to be there, and there was a whole lot of people that were faster than me. And I think that I heard that it was within the last year how fast did they had run. So maybe it was the last summer or the summer before the Olympics, that kind of thing. And so I was able to get into the finals, and I was excited about that. Just to be in the final race in the world. And
that was pretty early in your career.
Yes, it was.
How old were you?
About 24, 23.
So you'd just gotten out of the University of Oregon.
Yes, 2 years before that. And I was still under Bowerman's
coaching.
Tutelage and coaching, yeah. And you know, I think in one sentence, I've never been beaten by a Russian. And I've run against quite a few of them, and I've never been beaten by a Chinese guy. But of course, there's lots of little countries that China and Russia are not little. But and Russia was proud of their track teams too. You know, there's little things you do that you can say that no one else did. But anyway, what else is important?
Well, a lot of people would probably point to your American records in the mile and the 2 mile. When did you break the American record in the mile?
That's sort of interesting. It was 1965, and at that time, for some reason, I was in much better shape because of some heavy training the years before. And I was up in Canada in the spring, running against almost all the good runners in the world. Peter Snell was there. And because of the way I knew he ran, I took the lead at the half-mile mark, knowing that he was devastating fast, and I went as hard as I could for the last half mile, and I set an American record of 3:55.4, mostly because I was afraid of Peter Snell, and I was astonished to hear the second place was 4:02 something.
Now, Peter Snell, was he still the world record holder?
Oh yes, he was. Oh yes, he was 3:54 type.
So you were only 1 second off the world's record at that point.
The world record that I saw right after my American record was 3:53 something, which would have broken Peter Snell's, and that was by
Michel Jazzy?
Yes, the Frenchman. And that actually was on television backwards. It looked like he was going the other way around the track. So somebody in the studio didn't know what they were doing.
So, how about the 2 mile American record that you broke?
That was the same year, and I can't recall what town or city it was in, but the 2 mile record was rather slow, and I think a couple of times we ran the 2 mile, Beatty and I, and he broke the world record, and I was about 8 seconds faster than the existing American record at the time, but of course it didn't count because Beatty was ahead of me. But it was faster than anybody else in America had run at that time.
In fact, you didn't run the 2 mile very often. It's kind of unusual that you ended up with the American record, because you were a miler.
Yes. High school, I didn't want to run the mile.
Yeah. How many times did you run the 2 mile?
Oh, probably 3 or 4. You know, they don't run that in Europe, but it's quite close to 3,000 meters, which is a steeplechase. In fact, those 2 records, I think, were very close together for a long time.
So it was probably about maybe the 3rd time that you ran the 2 mile that you got the American record?
I can't recall exactly that, but as I said, in one of them, Iglo had us setting pace for Beatty, and he told me, and I had never, at that time I had never run a 2 mile, and he wanted us to go at this horrific pace that would break the world record. And Bob Schul led for half, and I was supposed to lead to the 3/4, and I was going to drop out. But this was in the Southern Pacific AAU, and I looked around, and there wasn't anybody near us. So I picked up the speed again and finished in, I think, something like 8:36. And Jim Beatty ran a world record at 8:29.
You were also the NC2A champion in 1959.
Yes. Funny story, I was able to go to 3 national championships, which were the only ones you're allowed into, sophomore, junior, and senior year. The only problem was the first 2 years was the Olympic champion at 1,500 meters in Australia, and he was still in Villanova to school for that next 2 years. And so my coach Bowerman said, "You follow Ron Delaney. He knows what he's doing, and he knows the pace and everything like that." And so I ran with him, thinking that I had a bungee cord from my pants to his pants, and that might sound a little funny, but you know, you zone in on something, you can pretty well do it. So I didn't pay attention to anybody else in the race, and when he finally ran a smart race and right up to win it, I was right there in 2nd place, and there was, again, a lot of people that had better times than I do, but as Delaney would say, it's not who you beat, it's how you run the race. And fortunately, Barman was smart enough to know who to run. If you get an Olympic champion, you better be knowing how to run right. So that worked.
You also finished 2nd in both the 1957 and 58 national championships.
Yes, I think there again, Delaney was going to double because he was still at Villanova, and so he laid back kind of in the 1,500, and there was somebody from Ohio State, I can't remember his name, but he was a pretty good miler, and he went out pretty fast, and I stayed with him, and he started slowing down with roughly 200 yards to go, and so that's when I passed him, and I think Delaney was also gaining at that time, so he caught me right at the finish line.
You were the 4th American to break the sub-4 minute mile.
Yes, and that was in '62 under Igloy, and there was maybe 4 or 5 more people that broke 4 minutes that year. It was after I did, but so it was beginning to flood the country with 4-minute milers.
In fact, as of 1967, you had more sub-4 minute miles than anybody in history.
Yes, it's funny, the first 21 times that I ran, I won 4 and lost 17. But that didn't really bother me. I really enjoyed getting faster each race, and so I wanted to run against the fastest runners in the world, and that's probably why your record isn't very good, but you're doing better, and that was more important to me at the time.
One thing that was unusual, you continued to run rather late in life. How old were you when you ran your last sub-4 minute mile?
I think I was 29 years old, and I hadn't run anything fast at all that year, and the national championships were coming up, and surprisingly myself, that was a race where Ryan was in it, and I knew him pretty well, and I talked to him a little bit about what he was going to do. He's a pretty honest guy, so he said, we're going to go for it. So I said, goodbye, Jim Ryan, and or see you later, Jim Ryan. And so I focused on the rest of the pack, and about 7 of us broke 4 minutes at that time, and I caught a kid from University of Oregon that had set a school record in that race by 1/10 of a second. And he was so much younger, he called me an old man, and he was mad that I beat him.
Speaking of age differences, one of your biggest disappointments was that you didn't qualify for the 1964 Olympics as most people expected, and you lost out to a very young Jim Ryan, who appeared out of Wichita High School in Kansas.
Right.
He was, 18 at the time, and before that time, it was extremely rare for a distance runner that young to have that kind of success.
That's exactly right. He was the first one.
And what was this? So at that point, you were probably, 27, 28?
Yeah, that's pretty close. I don't really pay attention to my age because it makes you feel old. But I was 11 years older than Ryan, and he had not beaten me before, but I didn't realize till later, and seeing he was 1/10 of a second behind me a couple times. And so during that race, I made a big mistake, maybe more than one. I kind of forgot about Ryan, and I was trying to win the race. And as most people know, 3 people go to the Olympic Games. And Tommy O'Hara and Burleson were hot stuff at that time, and I tried to beat them. And I've asked golfers before, when you're 150 yards off the hole, do you try to get the ball in the hole, or do you try to get on the green? And of course they say just on the green would be good. Well, I was stupid to try to win, and I ran as hard as I could, and Jim Ryan caught me by 1/10 of a second right at the finish line. And the first thing I thought when I went to the ground, because I'd leaned as far as I could, I'd been there before, but you got to tell yourself happy things, not just what you could have done. And I ran more races that year in the summer, and they were fun to do, and that started with the next year in '65 of getting some records. And I was training myself at that time, and my energy was coming up, and I had the mileage background by then, so I was running better.
How long, speaking of age, how long ago did you start running? How old were you when you got interested in the sport?
Well, part of it I'll skip because it's just nonsense, but I'd run around the neighborhood and see if I could beat somebody that was going the other direction or coming behind me. But, when I really learned that I could run was my freshman year at Lincoln, and I thought maybe I'd play basketball, but when you're second string in grade school and some team beats your team 44-2, the coach asked me if I wanted to go in the game, and I said, no, I don't. And so get to Lincoln, I was kind of searching around, and we had a science teacher, and he was going to take the distance runners in cross country, and I don't think I'd ever heard of cross country when I started at Lincoln, but we got together and during the early fall and ran together. We ran up Cardinal Drive and some steep places, and then usually slowed down going downhill because you can hurt yourself too much or fall down if you're running downhill. So that got us, our whole cross-country team, in pretty good shape. Our races were up in Washington Park, which is hilly, and so some of the other schools coming in there had never seen hills like that. So we had an advantage in cross-country when I was at Lincoln, and I think we won the city meet and the state meet from a lot of the training we did. And we had good varsity runners, and a lot of them were coming back to school the next year, and so I had other people that were stronger and had more experience than I did. So we won again on the varsity. But as you know, freshmen at that time couldn't run on the varsity. It was somewhere in the 1980s, or no, 60s, late 60s, that varsities could take freshmen on the team.
How about your sophomore year?
In running or track or
Track, yeah.
well, you know what? I was running the half mile 99% of the time. I ran some relays, but I ran the half mile and did third or fourth in the state my sophomore year, and my junior year I won it, and just by an inch or so. And this guy ran way too fast the first lap, and I thought I got to catch up with him, and that worked, and I ran about a 2:01 point something at that time, and was pretty pleased with that, mainly just because I won.
Were colleges starting to take an interest in you after you won the state championship?
A few local schools were, but I hadn't heard from Oregon or Oregon State, and that I didn't want to really go out of state.
When did you finally hear from, after your senior year, presumably? What happened in your senior year in the state meet?
Well, there again, this kid from Albany went like 55 seconds the first quarter, and that sort of scared me, but I stayed close to him because that would make you with a 150 half mile. So I thought, this is almost impossible. So I followed him as close as I could, and then I actually ran a 63-second lap and won by quite a few yards. That's a 158, and that was a state record at the time.
So at this point, you'd won the state 880 twice, so surely the coaches, college coaches, were starting to recruit you.
Yes, I did hear from Bowerman, and I saved those letters, because I save everything. I've been told I'm a pack rat, but it's kind of fun to look back on things. And I heard from Oregon State, and I wasn't really interested in going anywhere else, so I went down to Oregon State first, I think, but I found out that the track coach was also the athletic director, and the track wasn't very good either. And so I wanted somebody full-time, you know, dedicated to track. Luckily enough, when I went to Oregon, Bill Bowerman was the head track coach, but it appeared that he liked distance running better, and he had some assistants, but not a lot like you'd expect to have for a track meet. I mean, somebody had to coach the field events, and he did it all, and he had one or two assistants, I think, by the time I was a junior. And I was lucky to have somebody that was interested in distance running, and that gave me a big boost for everything I was doing the next 4 years.
Did he already have a reputation as a world-class distance running coach?
He did, and I didn't know that when I first went down there. He did a few bizarre things, but he was he always had us ready in May and June, which was the important races. And I can remember being kind of surprised about somebody at Oregon State that had run a 4:12 or something like that, and I thought, gee, Bill, this is going to be kind of catchy or what? He said, Grelle, this is April. You're going to be ready in May and June, and that's exactly what would happen. He had the whole team at their peak when the races were important.
And you had a fellow miler, same year as yourself, who later teamed up with Bill Bowerman and became very famous in their own right in a slightly different area.
I'm not sure if you mean...
I'm speaking of Phil Knight.
Oh, yeah. Yes. He was a teammate of mine, but he was an enemy when we were in high school because he was at Cleveland and I was at Lincoln. And then we went down to Oregon together, and our freshman year, Bowerman was thinking he got 7 people on the freshman team to run under 4:30. And that doesn't sound like much, but at that time, there's a few schools that had a 4:30 miler, but I don't think anybody had 7 of them in the same race. So that was one of the first goals is running a mile. In fact, I didn't want to run the mile. I wanted to stay in the half mile. And I told Bowerman a number of times that I won the state 2 times in a row, and I won every race my freshman year. So why would I want to hurt twice as long when I can win a shorter race?
So the 2 co-founders of Nike, one was your coach and the other was your teammate.
Yes, Phil Knight and Bill Bowerman.
So after after you got started running with Bill, we've already mentioned that you had been in the Olympics under Bowerman, had placed in the NC2A twice in 1957-58, second place, and won it in 1959. That was already a very successful career under Bowerman, but then you went to Los Angeles to run under a different coach.
Mihaly Igloy from Hungary, and another person came with him named Laszlo Tabori. Igloy had 3 world champions at 1,500 meters, 5,000 meters, and 10,000 meters, and so he was sort of the head coach for Hungary for the distance runners. And if you might remember, in the 1960s, Hungary was occupied by Russia, and that's why he came to America. But we were very lucky in Los Angeles to have him there, because I was down there with a full-time job, and so we started training together, and which sort of surprised me. We trained every morning before we went to work, and again after we got off to work, we came back and did the same thing, or harder work. And you get a lot stronger doing things like that. But if you have a job, fortunately I had a job that I was on my own. You didn't have to punch in at 9 o'clock and get off at 5. You just had to get your job done during the day. And you're driving, from job to job in your car and going to other schools. But so I had plenty of time under him for almost 4 years to get a lot better. And I was with Jim Beatty, who turned out to be a record holder in 2 or 3 events, and Bob Schul and a couple other guys that could run distances.
Bob Schul, in fact, was the Olympic champion in the 5,000.
That's right.
So you had some very high-quality teammates there as well as a
That's right. Yeah. So
high-powered coach.
One of the best things that happen, if you're running with real good runners, you're going to get better or you're left behind. So you don't want to be the best runner in the school because you don't have to do much. And I've seen lately that even some high school kids have run in open meets because they were so good. And because their team, they were so much better than their team, they weren't getting much out of it.
And in fact, you started a great tradition of 4-minute milers at the University of Oregon.
Bill Bowerman had kind of a personal race with the coach at Villanova. He had a lot of 4-minute milers, and his pipeline was from Ron Delaney from Ireland. And of course, unfortunately for Bowerman, he worked for the airlines over there and could get a lot of the Irish runners to come over to America, and he could probably get them on the plane for free. I'm not sure how that worked, but they all went to Villanova, 90% of them. And of course, a lot of those guys, have O, and my son called it the O team because O'Reilly and all those things are a lot of the Irish in that. And so they had a really good team, even track and cross country. But Villanova coach and Bowerman were sort of in a private race to see who could get the fastest runner the soonest.
Worthy of mention is another one of your teammates, Bill Dellinger. He was a medalist in 1964 5,000 meters as well.
Yes.
And the Oregon track coach. How long did you run with Bill?
I was really fortunate about that because I was a freshman, he was a senior, and we got to run with him and stuff at that time. And even Ken Reiser was a national champion at 2 miles or 5,000, I don't remember which, but he was a better distance runner. And by running with those people, again, you're with some people that are much better than you are, and you get to train with those kind of people. And then again, Dellinger came back from the Air Force when I was a senior, and we were training together again. And so those kind of things really helped. I mean, a good coach obviously helps, but people to run with is almost as important.
So looking back, what was the most satisfying part of your career?
Oh, probably a few things would be important. You know, running in the Olympics is, to me, it's a big deal. And setting a world record or an American record and being the fastest person in America for a while, that's another big thrill. Otherwise, you know, I just enjoyed running a lot, and I enjoyed beating people. I didn't enjoy losing, but if I was getting better, I was satisfied. And I kind of have this attitude or feeling that a good athlete is made up of the genes he's already inherited, and maybe 20-25% of his ability is the burning desire to be better, and kind of like Prefontaine, who trained awfully hard. And the other 20 or 25% would be to have the good coaches and the family that can get you to the good races.